When the bladder signals it's time to go, you might feel a slight discomfort, like character A here. This is the first urge to pee.
Imagine a very familiar moment. You're stuck in traffic, in a meeting, in the middle of a game you don't want to pause, or simply too lazy to stand up. Your body gently whispers, "Hey, go to the bathroom," and you answer with a very human response. Just a minute. The story begins right there, in that tiny moment. Inside you, the bladder doesn't know that you're busy or trying to tough it out. It does exactly one job: store urine, the waste that your kidneys have carefully filtered out of your blood to keep your internal environment clean. The bladder is like an elastic pouch. At first, it's soft. It stretches. It's very patient. As urine slowly accumulates, it quietly sends a gentle signal to the brain, almost like a whisper. "I'm filling up." The first time, the brain usually listens, but humans tend to negotiate. When you keep holding it, the bladder has no choice but to stretch even more. The pressure inside rises. The surrounding muscles have to tense up to keep the fluid in, like holding an overfilled water balloon with both hands. The discomfort doesn't appear to bother you. It is a warning language. The problem is this: if you keep ignoring that language, the body starts to get confused. Regularly holding in urine causes the bladder to slowly lose its ability to recognize its own limits. Signals sent to the brain can become delayed, distorted, or arrive too late. Some people stop knowing when they truly need to go. Others struggle to empty their bladder completely, and the urine left behind, which should have been expelled, becomes an ideal environment for bacteria to grow. Urinary tract infections don't happen suddenly. They are often the result of many small moments of holding it, repeated over and over, each time thinking, "It's fine." End quote. The interesting thing is this: your body never overreacts. It only reacts exactly as much as necessary. The urge to urinate is not an inconvenience. It is a safety system. In modern life, we've become used to postponing everything, even our most basic needs. Biology doesn't understand the concept of being busy. It only understands balance. And every time you endure instead of listening, you teach your body that its signals don't matter. This story isn't meant to scare you about holding it once. Science isn't extreme. It simply wants you to remember one very simple thing. Your body always talks to you before it has to shout. And sometimes, standing up and going to the bathroom at the right moment isn't just a courtesy to yourself, it's the simplest way to keep everything inside you running smoothly for a very long time. Seen through a scientific lens, the story becomes even clearer. The bladder is not just a storage bag. Its wall is made of the detrusor muscle, a special type of smooth muscle whose job is to contract rhythmically when you urinate and relax when urine is being stored. Its activity is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, meaning you don't consciously command it every second. You can only work with it or work against it. When you hold your urine for too long, pressure inside the bladder keeps rising. Stretch receptors in the bladder wall are strongly stimulated and send repeated signals to the brain. If holding urine becomes a frequent habit, the brain begins to learn something dangerous. This signal doesn't need an immediate response. Over time, that neural connection becomes less precise. This is why many long-term holders experience a sudden urgent urge, or the opposite, a loss of normal urge sensation. Urology research shows that keeping urine in the bladder for extended periods increases the risk of urinary retention. And when urine is not fully expelled, bacteria such as E. coli can multiply rapidly. This is the biological mechanism behind urinary tract infections, not poor hygiene, but stagnant flow. A study published in the Journal of Urology found that people who regularly delay urination have significantly higher rates of bladder dysfunction, especially in high-stress work environments, where people tend to push through and get the job done. The body, once again, does not distinguish between deadlines and biological risk. Notably, children and adults are affected in different ways. In young children, repeated holding can disrupt normal bladder development, leading to bedwetting or loss of bladder control. In adults, the process is quieter. The sensation of pressure becomes familiar. Tolerance increases and dysfunction appears later, often without anyone connecting it to a habit that once seemed harmless. Neuroscience calls this phenomenon maladaptive adaptation. The body doesn't become numb. It simply learns how to endure in silence until it can't anymore. The most important insight is not never hold your urine. That's unrealistic. The insight is this. Every time you hold it, you are training your nervous system to respond differently, and the nervous system learns very fast. We often talk about eating on time, sleeping enough, and managing stress. Yet, we ignore small physiological signals that repeat every day. In biology, it is precisely these small behaviors that shape long-term function. Your body doesn't demand perfection. It only asks that you don't ignore it too often. And if there is one final message science wants to leave behind, it is this. Uncomfortable sensations are not your enemy. They are the earliest and most honest warning system before the body is forced to switch into repair mode. And if we dig one layer deeper, this story begins to touch on something science rarely talks about in everyday language: the relationship between control and physiology. In many behavioral experiments, scientists have noticed a strange common pattern. People tend to hold their urine more often when they feel they lack autonomy, high-pressure workplaces, rigid classrooms, long shifts, or situations where it feels inconvenient to stand up. In those moments, the body isn't just holding urine, it is enduring. Stress activates the sympathetic nervous system, the same system involved in bladder control. When stress becomes chronic, the detrusor muscle can no longer relax in a normal rhythm. This is why many people feel a strong urge to urinate, but then struggle to go, or feel unfinished even after they do, not because of weakness, but because the nervous system is stuck in a defensive state. A Scandinavian study on healthcare workers with long shifts found significantly higher rates of urinary dysfunction compared to those working regular office hours. Not because they drank more fluids, but because they consistently postponed basic physiological needs. The body learned to adapt to being ignored, and that adaptation came with a very real cost. Here lies an interesting biological paradox. The better you are at holding it, the more likely the system is to malfunction. Not because the bladder becomes weak, but because it is forced to operate outside its natural design. Biology is not optimized for prolonged endurance. It is optimized for rhythm, fill, signal, release, rest. When this cycle is distorted too often, the system begins to misfire. The deepest insight is this: your body doesn't betray you. It reflects how you treat it. You teach it that its needs can be postponed indefinitely, and it believes you until it can't anymore. That's when vague symptoms appear: unexplained pressure or pain, recurring inflammation, false urges, or even sleep disturbances as the bladder's rhythm becomes disrupted at night. These rarely appear suddenly. They accumulate quietly, just like the habit that created them. What science wants to emphasize is not fear, but respect for biological rhythm. Going to the bathroom at the right time is one of the most basic self-regulation behaviors the nervous system uses to maintain internal order. And perhaps, when viewed more broadly, this isn't just a story about the bladder. It's a story about how long we've been living in a state of just endure a little longer. How many other small signals in the body are treated the same way? Tired, but pushing through. Thirsty, but forgetting to drink. Stressed, but calling it normal. Biology does not judge. It only remembers. And every time you stand up and go, when your body speaks, it isn't weakness or inconvenience. It's a quiet, deeply scientific, and very human act. Choosing to listen before everything is forced to shout. Try to imagine this through very ordinary, familiar examples. A long-haul driver once shared that during overnight drives, he learned how to lock away the urge to urinate. At first, it was because stopping wasn't convenient. Later, it became habit. But years later, something unexpected happened. There were times when his bladder was clearly full, yet his brain didn't send a strong enough signal. He only noticed when the urge hit suddenly and urgently, almost too late to react. That wasn't aging. It was a nervous system trained the wrong way over many years. Or consider another very common example. Students sitting through long classes. Many hold their urine because they're embarrassed to ask permission or afraid of disrupting the lesson. Pediatric studies show that children who frequently hold their urine have higher rates of urinary tract infections and nighttime bedwetting. The key point is that these children aren't lazy about going to the bathroom. They are learning to ignore bodily signals because their environment doesn't encourage listening to them. In adults, the story becomes even more subtle. An office worker may be used to drinking coffee all day, but keeps delaying bathroom breaks because of back-to-back meetings. Caffeine increases urine production. The bladder fills faster, but behavior doesn't change. The result is prolonged high pressure on the bladder. Over time, the bladder muscle becomes either overly sensitive or overly numb. Both states lead to dysfunction. In medicine, there's a cold-sounding term for this: overdistension, excessive stretching of the bladder. When this happens repeatedly, muscle fibers and nerves are pulled beyond their physiological limits. Part of the bladder's natural ability to contract is reduced. This explains why some people still feel pressure or heaviness after urinating, as if the body can no longer open and close on the right rhythm. Another easy image to grasp. Think of a spring. Pull it gently, and it snaps back perfectly. Pull it harder, and it still returns. But if you pull it too long, too often, the spring loses its elasticity. The bladder works the same way. Biology closely resembles mechanics here. Every system has a limit to recovery. What matters is this: the body always tries to adapt before it breaks. It doesn't complain right away. It raises the tolerance threshold. And that silence is what makes people believe they're fine, until one day, symptoms appear more often, last longer, and become harder to connect to the original cause. The deepest insight from these examples isn't a warning, but a very human observation. What we do every day, no matter how small, is training the body to become a certain version of itself. Holding urine once won't harm you. Holding it as a habit will. Science doesn't ask you to live in perfect conditions. It simply shows that the body functions best when signals are responded to on time. And sometimes the most profound act of self-care is so simple that we overlook it. Standing up, going to the bathroom, and letting the body do exactly what it was designed to do. And at this point, there is a moment worth inviting the viewer to pause just for a few seconds. Because if you observe closely enough, you'll notice a slightly unsettling truth. The body always sends signals long before it breaks. Humans, however, usually only pay attention once the limit has already been crossed. In emergency rooms, urologists sometimes encounter cases that seem puzzling at first. The patient isn't in severe pain, doesn't have a high fever, yet the bladder is dangerously overdistended and urine cannot flow normally. When asked carefully, the answers sound familiar. I often hold it. I'm used to it. My job doesn't allow it. No single episode caused this. There were thousands of tiny moments, each one thought to be harmless. What makes this even more thought-provoking is this: your brain is extremely good at rationalizing. It can turn discomfort into something normal. It can erase the memory of the original sensation. And once the brain learns that biological signals don't need to be prioritized, the body slowly loses the ability to communicate clearly with you. Some people begin going to the bathroom by schedule, not by sensation. Some only realize they need to go when it's already too late. Others live with a constant low-level heaviness or discomfort, unable to name its cause. All of these are different expressions of the same issue: biological rhythm bent for too long. And this doesn't apply only to the bladder. It's a principle repeated throughout the body. Sleepiness pushed aside with caffeine. Hunger masked with sugar. Stress hidden behind the words, "I'm fine." Each time, the nervous system records a new lesson. Signals can be ignored. Eventually, the body changes strategy. It stops whispering. It amplifies. symptoms become louder, more uncomfortable, more persistent. Not to punish you, but because it's the only way left that still works. If this video has kept you here until now, it's probably no longer just about holding urine. It's because you've recognized how many times you've lived in those just a little longer moments. Science doesn't demand immediate change. It simply invites you to notice one very direct truth. Your body always works with you until you force it to work against itself. And sometimes, listening to a very small, very ordinary, very human signal is the only way to keep the most complex systems inside you running smoothly, quietly, without drama, just on time. So if this story has to be closed with one thing made absolutely clear, science would choose neither fear nor moral advice. It would choose a principle that is cold, but undeniably true. The body never reacts randomly. It only reacts after limits have been crossed for long enough. Holding your urine is not a mistake. It is a small signal that you've grown used to living in a state of endurance. And biology always remembers repeated states, whether you notice them or not. From a scientific perspective, the bladder, nervous system, kidneys, and brain do not operate independently. They form a finely coordinated system built on rhythm, flow, and timely feedback. When you respect a simple signal like the urge to urinate, you're not just protecting your bladder. You're keeping an entire internal regulatory chain running smoothly, from neural signaling and hormones to sleep and recovery. The most important question isn't, is holding urine harmful? It's the deeper one behind it. How long have you treated ignoring your body as something normal? Science doesn't ask you to live perfectly, with rigid discipline or health obsession. It offers a quieter reminder. Living systems survive by being listened to early, not by being good at enduring. And if, after this video ends, you stand up and go to the bathroom at the right moment, not out of fear, but out of understanding, that's already a very real connection between science and everyday life. No big changes are required. Just don't stay silent in the face of small signals. Because in biology, just like in life, the things ignored for too long are the ones that are eventually forced to speak.